Hi. Welcome back to another episode of Horror Talker. Thank you so much for the love you are giving to this channel. It really is very motivating. In today's episode, we have a set of true stories which left these late-night driving buddies questioning their existence. Let's listen to what they have to share. I never thought a late-night drive with friends would lead to one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. It was a clear summer night in the heart of the American Midwest, and a group of us decided to take a road trip to a remote cabin nestled deep in the wilderness of Montana. We were confident that with our trusty GPS, we'd reach our destination without a hitch. My buddies, Mike, Sarah, and Jake, were all in high spirits as we set out on the journey. Laughter and excitement filled the car as we cruised along the winding highways, the glow of the dashboard illuminating our eager faces. The digital voice of the GPS, our guiding companion, assured us that we were on the right path. But that assurance quickly faded into uncertainty as the GPS suddenly malfunctioned. The screen glitched, and the once familiar voice became a garbled mess. Panic washed over us as the road ahead veered off into an unmarked, winding trail through a dense forest. Guys, I think we're on the wrong road," I stammered, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Relax, it's probably just a glitch," Mike reassured us, his voice tinged with unease. We continued down the ominous road, hoping that we'd soon reconnect with a familiar route. However, the forest closed in around us, the towering trees casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning as if leading us deeper into an abyss. That's when the first strange occurrence happened. Disembodied voices crackled through the car's radio. It started as a faint whisper, barely audible over the static, but it soon grew clearer. Words emerged from the chaos, words that sounded like warnings, telling us to turn back, to find our way out before it was too late. "Did anyone else hear that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. We all nodded, our expressions mirroring the growing unease in the car. We tried to ignore the voices, convincing ourselves that it was just a radio glitch, but deep down, we knew something was terribly wrong. As we continued along the winding road, shadows danced at the edge of our vision, figures that seemed to dart between the trees. We couldn't make out any distinct features, just fleeting glimpses of darkness. "Are those people?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. I slowed the car to a crawl, and we peered into the woods, our hearts pounding in our chests. The figures remained elusive, always just out of reach, and our attempts to communicate with them were met with eerie silence. Desperation clawed at us as the night wore on, and the road showed no signs of leading us back to civilization. We took random turns, hoping to stumble upon a familiar landmark or a road sign, but it was as if we were trapped in a never-ending maze. The disembodied voices on the radio grew louder and more insistent, pleading with us to turn back, to escape while we still could. Panic welled up inside us, and we were torn between heeding the warnings and pushing forward in search of an exit. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time seemed to lose all meaning on that forsaken road. Our car's fuel gauge teetered dangerously close to empty, and exhaustion gnawed at us. The forest closed in around us, and the road became narrower and more treacherous with each passing mile. That's when we encountered the first detour sign. It pointed to a narrow dirt path that veered off from the already narrow road, leading deeper into the heart of the forest. The GPS, still malfunctioning, displayed no alternative routes. Reluctantly, I followed the detour sign, our path now illuminated solely by the car's headlights. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, the sense of isolation and dread grew stronger. The forest seemed to come alive around us, the rustling leaves and chirping insects creating an eerie symphony of sound. And then, we saw it, a dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. It stood alone, a haunting silhouette in the darkness. The sight sent chills down our spines, and we knew we had to investigate. We cautiously approached the cabin, our flashlights cutting through the impenetrable blackness. The door creaked open, revealing a scene of utter devastation inside. Furniture lay in disarray, walls were covered in strange symbols, and an overwhelming sense of malevolence hung in the air. As we explored further, we discovered a journal with entries detailing the cabin's tragic history, a place cursed by a vengeful spirit, where travelers like us had become lost and never returned. The entries spoke of unexplainable phenomena, of voices in the night, and of shadowy figures haunting the forest. Panic set in once again, and we realized we needed to leave the cabin and escape this nightmarish road. But as we made our way back to the car, we were met with an unsettling sight. The path we had taken to reach the cabin had vanished. The detour sign had disappeared, leaving us stranded in the heart of the forest. Desperation turned to terror as we realized we were truly trapped. The disembodied voices on the radio grew louder, their warnings now laced with a sense of impending doom. We had no choice but to continue down the winding road, hoping against hope that it would eventually lead us to safety. Hours turned into days, and our supplies dwindled. Exhaustion and fear gnawed at us, and the unending darkness of the forest became a relentless torment. The car showed no signs of slowing down, and the road showed no mercy. As we pressed on, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. A faint glow in the distance, like the first light of dawn, pierced through the trees. We accelerated toward it, the car's engine roaring with newfound energy. Finally, we burst through the tree line and onto an open road. Civilization lay ahead, and a gas station loomed in the distance. We pulled in, our hearts pounding with relief. It was as if the nightmare had finally come to an end. But as we stepped out of the car, a chill ran down my spine. The gas station appeared empty, and a feeling of unease settled over us. The radio, once again functional, crackled to life with the same disembodied voices, this time warning us to leave the gas station, to escape while we still could. Fear gripped us once more, and we scrambled back into the car, peeling out of the gas station with tires screeching. We drove until we reached a busy highway, our escape from that nightmarish road finally realized. To this day, we have no explanation for what happened on that remote, winding road in the heart of Montana. We never spoke of it again, but the memory of that terrifying journey still haunts our dreams, a reminder that there are places in this world where the line between reality and nightmare becomes dangerously thin. It was supposed to be a simple road trip with friends, a journey to our favorite camping spot nestled deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Mike, Sarah, Jake, and I had done this trip countless times before, but on this particular night, we decided to take a shortcut through an unfamiliar stretch of forested highway. Little did we know that this detour would lead us into the heart of a terrifying nightmare. The sun had long set when we made the fateful decision to take the shortcut. We were eager to reach our campsite and enjoy a long weekend away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The GPS had suggested a quicker route through the dense woods, and in our excitement, we unanimously agreed to follow it. The unpaved road was narrow and winding, shrouded in darkness as the towering trees formed a thick canopy above us. The headlights of our car cut through the inky blackness, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and sway in the corners of our vision. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The air felt heavy with an unspoken tension, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustling leaves and distant hoot of an owl. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, just as unease began to settle in, we saw him, an unexpected hitchhiker standing on the roadside, his figure a mere shadow in the dim glow of our headlights. I slowed the car to a stop, my heart pounding in my chest as we exchanged uneasy glances. "Should we pick him up?" Jake asked, his voice wavering. Mike leaned forward, peering at the hitchhiker through the windshield. "I don't know, guys. Something feels off about this." But Sarah, ever the compassionate one, urged us to help the stranger. "He might be in trouble. We can't just leave him here." With a reluctant nod, I rolled down the window, and the hitchhiker approached. He was dressed in tattered clothes, his face hidden beneath a mop of disheveled hair. His eyes, though, were piercing and intense, like they held a secret too dark to share. "Need a lift?" I asked, my voice trembling. The hitchhiker didn't respond. Instead, he climbed into the back seat without a word, his presence sending shivers down our spines. The tension in the car grew palpable as we continued down the winding road, the hitchhiker's silence weighing on us like an ominous cloud. Minutes turned into hours, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly around us. We tried to make small talk to break the silence, but the hitchhiker remained unresponsive, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. Uneasiness gnawed at us, and we were eager to reach our campsite and bid farewell to our enigmatic passenger. But the forest had other plans. As we continued along the winding road, eerie figures began to emerge from the darkness. Shadows darted between the trees, their movements barely perceptible but undeniably there. We exchanged nervous glances, the unease in the car now reaching a fever pitch. "What the hell is going on?" Mike muttered, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I had no answers, and the feeling of being watched intensified with each passing mile. The unsettling occurrences didn't stop there. Strange messages appeared on the forest floor, cryptic symbols etched into the dirt, as if the very ground itself was trying to communicate with us. "Stop the car," Jake said suddenly, his voice urgent. I hit the brakes, and we skidded to a halt. Jake pointed out the window, his face pale with terror. In the moonlight, we could see a message spelled out with rocks on the forest floor: "Leave now." Panic surged through us, and without hesitation, I turned the car around and sped back the way we had come. The hitchhiker remained in the back seat, still silent, but his presence seemed even more foreboding now. As we retraced our path, the forest seemed to close in around us, the trees reaching out with gnarled branches like skeletal fingers. The figures in the darkness grew more numerous, their forms becoming clearer as they flitted between the trees. Their eyes gleamed with an unsettling, otherworldly light. "We have to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice quivering. I nodded in agreement, my heart pounding in my chest as I pushed the car to its limits. The forest, however, had other plans. The winding road seemed to stretch endlessly, leading us in circles as if it had a mind of its own. Desperation set in as we realized we were trapped, our escape route constantly shifting and changing. The hitchhiker remained silent, his presence an ever-present reminder of the nightmare we found ourselves in. As hours stretched into what felt like an eternal night, desperation clung to us like a suffocating shroud. Our supplies had dwindled to a mere trickle, water bottles drained, snacks reduced to crumbs, and the fuel gauge teetered precariously close to empty. We were running on fumes, both in terms of gasoline and hope. The figures in the forest, which had once been mere shadows, now grew bolder and more brazen. They no longer flitted through the trees, but instead, they stood at the edge of the road, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling malevolence. It was as if they were herding us deeper into their dark realm, closing in from all sides. Their movements were unpredictable, erratic, and increasingly menacing. They seemed to taunt us, mock us, as if reveling in our fear and confusion. Whispers drifted on the wind, echoing through the trees, though we could never discern the words, only the chilling tone of maleficent intent. "Is this some sick joke?" Mike muttered, his voice strained with exhaustion. "A prank or something?" But deep down, we knew this was no prank. It was as if the forest itself had become sentient, a malevolent force that reveled in our torment. It wanted us to know we were trapped, that there was no escape from the horrors that lurked within its shadowy depths. Finally, as exhaustion threatened to overtake us, we stumbled upon a clearing in the forest. The moonlight bathed the area in an eerie glow, revealing an ancient, overgrown stone circle at the center. Without hesitation, I drove the car into the clearing, and the moment the tires crossed the threshold of the circle, the forest seemed to recoil. The figures melted back into the shadows, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We continued driving until we reached a nearby town, our relief palpable. The hitchhiker had disappeared as mysteriously as he had arrived, leaving us with more questions than answers. We never spoke of that night again, but the memory of our journey through that sinister forest still haunts us. To this day, I can't help but wonder what malevolent force had led us astray, and what dark secrets lay hidden within the heart of those woods. I'll never forget that fateful summer night when my friends and I embarked on a late-night road trip through the desolate backroads of Texas. It was meant to be a carefree adventure, a break from the monotony of our daily lives, but it quickly devolved into a nightmare beyond our wildest imagination. My companions were Sarah, Jake, and Mike. We had been friends since childhood, bound together by a shared love for the open road and the thrill of the unknown. On that moonlit night, we piled into my old pickup truck, its vintage radio crackling to life as I turned the key in the ignition. The desert landscape stretched out before us, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. The radio, an ancient relic from the past, played old tunes from a bygone era. As the wind rustled through the open windows, we laughed, reminisced about old times, and shared stories from our youth. It was during one of our conversations that the radio first spoke to us, an eerie, disembodied voice that seemed to materialize from the static. At first, we dismissed it as interference, a hiccup in the aging device. But then the voice grew clearer, its words unmistakable. "Welcome, travelers," it said, sending shivers down our spines. "You've entered the realm of fate, and your journey has only just begun." We exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if one of us had played a prank. The voice, however, continued, revealing chilling details about our lives that no one else could have known. It spoke of past accidents, personal secrets, and even our innermost fears. "You, Sarah," the voice intoned, "fear the darkness, but tonight, it will be your closest companion." Sarah's face drained of color as she clutched the edge of her seat. I could see the fear in her eyes, mirrored by the rest of us. It was as if the voice had glimpsed into our souls, revealing our deepest vulnerabilities. "We have to turn this thing off," Jake stammered, his fingers trembling as he reached for the radio dial. But before he could act, the voice continued, predicting a future none of us wanted to face. It foretold accidents on the road, encounters with eerie strangers, and horrors that awaited us in the shadows. Panic washed over us, and Mike tried to change the radio station, but the voice persisted, its words weaving a chilling tapestry of our impending doom. The road stretched on, the desert landscape seemingly endless, as the voice on the radio grew more malevolent with each passing mile. It taunted us, mocked our attempts to escape its clutches, and revealed terrifying details about our present and future. As we continued driving, the predictions of the voice began to come true. An accident ahead blocked our path, forcing us to take an unfamiliar detour through the desolate desert. Along the way, we encountered eerie strangers who seemed to appear out of nowhere, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling knowledge. Sarah, in particular, was tormented by the voice's prophecies. It had revealed her fear of the dark, and now, as night fell and the desert became a sea of shadows, her unease grew into full-blown terror. She clung to my arm, her eyes darting nervously at every passing shadow. The voice on the radio continued its relentless assault, its words becoming more cryptic and ominous. It spoke of a forsaken place hidden in the desert, a place where our fate would be sealed. It urged us to find it, to confront the horrors that awaited us there. As the night wore on, we grew increasingly paranoid and fearful. The once familiar desert had become a labyrinth of dread, and the vintage radio had become our tormentor. We couldn't turn it off, every attempt to silence it only made the voice grow louder and more insistent. Desperation set in as we realized that we were trapped in a nightmarish prophecy, a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Our bonds of friendship, once unbreakable, began to fray as paranoia gnawed at our sanity. Sarah's fear of the dark became a living nightmare as the voice's predictions came true one by one. Shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, creeping closer with each passing moment. It was as if the darkness itself had become a malevolent force, tormenting her relentlessly. But the worst was yet to come. The voice on the radio guided us to a forsaken place in the heart of the desert, a desolate expanse of barren land marked only by a crumbling, decrepit structure. The voice promised that our fate awaited us there, that we would find answers to the mysteries that had plagued us throughout the night. Reluctantly, we left the safety of the truck and ventured into the darkness. The moon cast an eerie glow over the abandoned structure, revealing a place that seemed to defy time itself. The voice urged us onward, promising that our questions would be answered within those decaying walls. Inside, we discovered a room filled with ancient relics and cryptic symbols etched into the walls. It was as if we had stepped into a place untouched by time, a place where the past and present converged in a nightmarish tableau. And then, in the center of the room, we found it, a vintage radio, identical to the one in my truck, emitting the same disembodied voice. It was as if the radio itself was a conduit for the malevolent force that had haunted us throughout the night. As we stared at the radio in horror, the voice on the other end revealed its true nature. It was not a mere transmission but a sentient entity, a dark force that fed on our fears and despair. It had drawn us into its web of torment, luring us into the forsaken place to seal our fate. Desperation and fear surged through us as we realized that there was no escaping the entity's clutches. It had ensnared us in a nightmarish prophecy, a twisted game from which there was no reprieve. But then, in a moment of clarity, I remembered something. The vintage radio in my truck had an off switch. With trembling hands, I reached for the radio in the abandoned room and flipped the switch. Silence enveloped us, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing. The entity, deprived of its conduit, had been silenced, its malevolent influence extinguished. We stumbled out of the forsaken place, our bond as friends stronger than ever. The nightmarish ordeal had tested us in ways we could never have imagined, but we had emerged from it intact, our lives no longer dictated by the sinister voice on the radio. As we drove away from that accursed place, the desert landscape stretched out before us once more, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. The vintage radio in my truck remained silent, its voice silenced forever, and we were free to continue our journey into the unknown, our friendship and resilience serving as our guiding light through the darkest of nights. Now, before we come back with brand new episodes for you, do subscribe to our channel Horror Talker. And share it with your friends and family. Stay awake and stay alert, because you never know. My wife, Sarah, and I had been on the road for hours, the relentless highway stretching out before us like an endless ribbon of asphalt. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting the world into a moonlit stillness. It was then that we spotted the sign for the Whispering Pines Motel. We'd been driving through rural Virginia, and the prospect of a warm bed and a good night's rest was too tempting to resist. The motel appeared like a mirage in the darkness, its neon sign flickering to life as we approached. Sarah and I exchanged tired smiles as we pulled into the parking lot. The Whispering Pines Motel had an eerie charm to it, the kind of place that seemed frozen in time. It was a single-story building with a row of rooms that faced an overgrown courtyard. The paint on the exterior was faded, and the windows had a slightly dusty look, but it had an inviting quality that made us feel welcome. We approached the front desk, where an elderly man with thinning white hair and a warm smile greeted us. His name tag read, Jerry. "Evening, folks. Looking for a room?" Jerry's voice was kind, and he seemed genuinely pleased to have customers. "Yes, just for the night," I replied, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Jerry handed us a set of keys with large, brass keychains that read, "Room 13. That's our last available room. It's cozy, but it'll do the trick. Enjoy your stay." We thanked Jerry and headed towards our room, our footsteps echoing in the silence of the courtyard. As we approached room 13, I couldn't help but notice how the building seemed to loom over us, casting long shadows that danced in the moonlight. The room itself was small but clean, with floral wallpaper that had seen better days. We set our bags down and collapsed onto the bed, our weariness making the worn-out mattress feel like a cloud. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought I heard a faint whisper in the air, but I dismissed it as a trick of the wind. The events that would unfold over the next few hours would convince me otherwise. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a strange noise. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone tapping their fingers on the nightstand. I turned to wake Sarah, but she was still asleep beside me. The noise seemed to be coming from the bathroom. With a sense of unease, I climbed out of bed and made my way to the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I couldn't believe my eyes. The bathroom mirror was covered in condensation, and as I peered closer, I saw that something had been written in the steam. It was a message, and my heart raced as I read it: "Leave before it's too late." The steamy letters seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly energy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching us. My trembling hand reached out to touch the mirror, as if expecting the letters to disappear under my fingertips. But they remained, an ominous warning etched into the condensation. Panic surged within me as I considered the implications of that message. "Something is terribly wrong here," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. I stumbled back in shock, the words etched into my mind. I tried to wake Sarah, but she was in a deep slumber, oblivious to the chilling message. I was torn between waking her and fleeing the motel, but something compelled me to stay and investigate further. As I ventured deeper into the bathroom, the room seemed to grow colder, and I could hear a faint whispering in the air. It was as if the walls themselves were murmuring secrets I couldn't decipher. The shower curtain rustled, and I jumped back in fright, expecting to see someone or something behind it. But when I pulled the curtain aside, there was nothing there. Just an empty bathtub, shrouded in shadows. I returned to the bedroom and decided to check outside. Maybe it was a prank, I thought, or perhaps there was a logical explanation for the bizarre occurrences. The courtyard outside was shrouded in darkness, the moonlight casting eerie shapes across the overgrown lawn. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes followed my every move. As I turned to head back inside, I saw a figure in the distance, a silhouette that seemed to materialize out of thin air. It stood motionless, its gaze fixed on me. Panic surged through my veins, and I stumbled back into our room, locking the door behind me. Sarah was awake now, her eyes wide with fear as she asked what was happening. I tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate. I showed her the message on the bathroom mirror, and her face grew pale. Sarah's voice trembled as she asked, "What do you think it means?" I hesitated, struggling to find a rational explanation. "I don't know, but we need to leave. Something is seriously wrong here." Agreement flashed in Sarah's eyes as we both rushed to gather our belongings. The sense of urgency was palpable, we couldn't afford to stay in a place where reality itself seemed to unravel. As we left the room and stepped out into the fog-shrouded night, I noticed that the parking lot had transformed. The dimly lit motel sign was now eerily bright, casting a harsh, unnatural glow. The surrounding area seemed to stretch endlessly into the fog, with no sign of the road or civilization. Sarah clutched my arm tightly, her fingers digging into my skin as she whispered, "This can't be real, right?" I agreed, and we hastily packed our belongings, making our way to the front desk. But when we reached the lobby, we were met with a shocking sight. Jerry, the motel owner, stood there, his eyes hollow and vacant. "You must leave," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. We tried to ask him what was happening, but he repeated the phrase over and over, a monotone mantra that sent shivers down our spines. Instead, his vacant eyes bore into ours, and he continued to repeat the same phrase, his voice devoid of emotion. It was as though he had been ensnared by a relentless compulsion, a haunting mantra that he couldn't escape. We exchanged anxious glances, the weight of the situation pressing upon us like an invisible force. The stranger's presence had shifted from enigmatic to downright unsettling. It was clear that something had driven him to the brink of madness, reducing him to this haunting repetition. Without waiting for an explanation, we turned and fled the motel, our footsteps echoing in the silent night. As we drove away, I glanced back at the Whispering Pines Motel, a place that seemed to exist on the border between reality and nightmare. The events of that night remained etched in our memories, a chilling reminder that some mysteries were never meant to be unraveled. We would never know the truth behind the ominous message on the bathroom mirror or the vacant stare of the motel owner. But one thing was certain, we would never forget the eerie whispers that had followed us from that forsaken place, echoing in the depths of our nightmares, a haunting reminder of the night we checked into the motel where reality unraveled. It was a crisp autumn evening when my friends and I found ourselves on the open road, surrounded by the vibrant colors of fall foliage. Our destination: an abandoned gas station we'd heard whispers about from locals. They called it the Desolation Station, a name that sent shivers down our spines even before we arrived. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as we pulled up to the gas station, and I could already feel the weight of the eerie atmosphere settling in. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The once bright signs were now faded and covered in graffiti, and the gas pumps stood like forgotten sentinels guarding the secrets of the past. My friends and I, Alex, Sarah, and Mark, had always been drawn to the mysterious and the macabre. We were the thrill seekers, the ones who couldn't resist the lure of the unknown. But as we stepped out of the car and ventured closer to the Desolation Station, a sense of unease washed over us. The entrance to the gas station was obscured by a rusty, creaking metal door, half open and beckoning us to enter. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie, and yet, we couldn't resist the pull. With a collective gulp, we crossed the threshold into the darkness. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, a cocktail of rust and dampness that assaulted our senses. Our footsteps echoed through the cavernous space as we moved deeper into the station. We flicked on our flashlights, their beams cutting through the inky blackness and revealing a space frozen in time. Dust-covered shelves lined the walls, filled with long-expired snacks and faded magazines. A calendar from the 1980s still hung on the wall, the days and months forever stuck in the past. As we explored further, we discovered something even more disturbing: messages scrawled on the walls in faded, trembling handwriting. "They're watching," read one. "Run while you still can," warned another. The writing appeared sporadic, as though the author had been in the throes of madness. Our uneasy laughter echoed through the gas station as we dismissed the messages as the work of bored teenagers or urban legends. But there was an undercurrent of tension that refused to dissipate. The back of the gas station held even darker secrets. As we pushed open a heavy door, we found ourselves in a room filled with grotesque artifacts that sent shivers down our spines. Glass jars contained strange, unidentifiable specimens, their contents obscured by years of decay. Tools with ominous stains lined a blood-stained workbench, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of iron. "This place gives me the creeps," Alex muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, guys, it's just some spooky props left behind by the gas station's previous owners. Probably just a local legend to keep people away." But even as he spoke, none of us could shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong about the Desolation Station. We decided to explore further, drawn by a morbid curiosity that seemed impossible to resist. As we delved deeper into the gas station, the flickering lights of our flashlights revealed unsettling discoveries. Strange symbols etched into the walls glowed with an eerie light, and we couldn't decipher their meaning. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled upon us. We couldn't ignore the unsettling messages that adorned the walls of the dimly lit motel room. The words seemed to pulse with a sense of urgency, as if they were the desperate pleas of someone who had been trapped in this nightmare before us. Sarah's trembling voice broke the silence. "Who could have written these? And why?" I shook my head, unable to offer any reasonable explanation. The messages seemed to be directed at us, as if someone or something knew of our presence and wanted to convey a dire warning. Before we could dwell on the eerie writings any longer, an ominous creaking sound filled the room. We turned our heads in unison to see the bathroom door slowly swinging open on its own, revealing the darkness beyond. Sarah gasped, her grip on my arm tightening. I could feel her fear radiating through her fingers. I approached the bathroom cautiously, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet with each step. As I peered into the dimly lit bathroom, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The bathtub was filled with murky water, and submerged beneath its surface was an old, cracked doll. Its porcelain face was twisted into a grotesque, permanent grin, and its lifeless eyes stared up at me accusingly. Sarah's voice quivered with fear as she said, "We're not alone in here, and whatever it is, it doesn't want us to leave." I scanned the room frantically, searching for any means of escape. The windows were sealed shut, and the walls felt like they were closing in on us, the sinister messages bearing down upon us like a relentless weight. Desperation pushed me to investigate the bathroom once more. I had to find a way out, or at least some clue to the motel's dark secrets. As I gazed at the doll submerged in the water, I noticed something unusual, an inscription carved into its porcelain skin. It was named Rita. It wasn't long before we heard the first sound, an echoing, disembodied laugh that seemed to come from all directions at once. We froze, our flashlights trembling in our hands. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah's voice quivered. The laugh came again, closer this time, as though it was right behind us. Panic set in, and we began to run, our footsteps echoing through the gas station as we fled. I glanced over my shoulder, catching a glimpse of movement in the shadows. My heart raced as I saw a figure, shrouded in darkness, emerge from behind a rusted shelf. The gas station had been empty when we arrived, and the sudden appearance of this mysterious presence filled me with an overwhelming sense of terror. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance in time with our racing hearts. The store shelves, once stocked with long-forgotten goods, now seemed to hold nothing but malevolence. We reached the entrance, the automatic sliding doors standing wide open, beckoning us to escape into the moonlit night. The cool air outside offered a brief respite from the oppressive atmosphere that had gripped the gas station. As we stumbled into the darkness, gasping for breath, we dared not look back. But the force pursuing us seemed relentless. We heard whispers in the air, voices that seemed to taunt and torment us. Shadows danced on the walls, and we couldn't escape the feeling that something was closing in. Our frantic escape led us back to the main room of the gas station, where we realized that the rusty metal door we'd entered through was now sealed shut. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped, with no way out. "We have to find another way," Mark shouted, desperation in his voice. We began searching for an exit, but every door was locked or blocked by debris. The malevolent force seemed to tighten its grip, and our flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. That's when we heard it, the sound of heavy, labored breathing, accompanied by low, guttural growls. We turned our flashlights towards the source of the noise and gasped in terror. In the dim light, we saw them, shadowy figures, hunched and grotesque, emerging from the darkness. Their eyes gleamed with malevolence, and their twisted forms seemed to defy the laws of nature. We were surrounded, with no way to escape. Our fear was palpable, a suffocating presence in the air. And then, just as it seemed all hope was lost, the malevolent figures began to retreat, disappearing into the shadows. With trembling hands, we approached the rusty metal door that had sealed us in. To our shock, it now stood slightly ajar, as though inviting us to leave. We wasted no time, fleeing the desolation station as though our lives depended on it. As we stumbled back into the cool night air, the gas station seemed to fade into the darkness, a nightmarish mirage that left us questioning our sanity. We never spoke of that night again, but the memories of the desolation station and the malevolent force that dwelled within it haunted our dreams. Some mysteries are never meant to be solved, and some places are better left abandoned in the depths of the unknown. And as we drove away from that forsaken gas station, we couldn't help but wonder what other dark secrets lay hidden along the winding highways of the United States, waiting for the next group of curious souls to stumble upon them. It was a moonless night when I found myself on that desolate stretch of highway, surrounded by nothing but the enveloping darkness. My journey had taken me far from the comfort of civilization, and the need for rest had grown overwhelming. As I spotted the faint glow of an isolated highway rest stop on the horizon, relief washed over me. The rest stop emerged from the darkness like an oasis in the night. Its dimly lit sign offered a simple promise of respite, and I welcomed the opportunity to escape the monotony of the road. Pulling into the parking lot, I couldn't help but notice the eerie silence that enveloped the place. There were no other travelers in sight, no distant hum of engines, just a palpable stillness that hung heavy in the air. I parked my car beneath a flickering street lamp and stepped out, my footsteps echoing through the quiet night. A feeling of unease settled upon me as I approached the rest stop building. The windows were dark, and the neon "Open 24 Hours" sign had an ominous flicker to it. Pushing open the heavy glass door, I entered a dimly lit interior. The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant filled the air, and a lone, disinterested cashier sat behind the counter, seemingly lost in thought. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice devoid of enthusiasm. "Just a cup of coffee," I replied, my weariness betraying me. As she filled a paper cup, I took a moment to survey my surroundings. The rest stop was eerily empty, devoid of any other patrons. Rows of empty booths lined one wall, and the dim lighting cast long, haunting shadows that danced across the floor. It was as if the place had been frozen in time, a relic of a bygone era. I took my coffee to a corner booth and settled in, hoping the caffeine would revive my spirits. But as I sipped the bitter brew, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The clock above the counter spun backward, its hands retracing their steps with each passing second. A chill ran down my spine as I watched, unable to tear my eyes away from the bizarre spectacle. The cashier remained unfazed, as if she hadn't noticed the clock's strange behavior. I decided to leave some money on the table and make a swift exit. But as I rose from my seat, I noticed figures moving outside the rest stop, their shapes obscured by the inky darkness. My heart quickened as I peered through the window, trying to make out who or what was approaching. The figures moved with an eerie, disjointed gait, their forms appearing and disappearing like wraiths in the night. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind as I realized there was no rational explanation for what I was witnessing. I turned to the cashier, desperation in my voice. "Do you see them? Those figures outside?" She glanced out the window with a disinterested look, as though the sight were nothing out of the ordinary. "Oh, they come and go," she replied casually, as if I were talking about the weather. My heart raced as I contemplated my options. I could stay and confront whatever was lurking in the darkness, or I could make a hasty retreat and hope to outrun the encroaching terror. But before I could decide, I heard a soft, whispered voice, barely audible but undeniably present. "Stay," it hissed, a sinister undertone to its words. The command sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt an overwhelming compulsion to remain in the rest stop, to confront whatever sinister force held sway over this forsaken place. It was as if the very walls were closing in around me, binding me to this nightmarish rest stop. The clock above the counter continued its relentless spin backward, the hands now moving in reverse at a rapid pace. The cashier's disinterested gaze never wavered, as though she were immune to the unfolding horrors. I turned back to the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw them, the figures emerging from the shadows, their forms becoming clearer with each step. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, their limbs elongated and distorted, their faces hidden by a grotesque mask of darkness. Their movements were unnatural, as if they were gliding effortlessly over the cracked pavement. The dim light from the gas station cast eerie shadows, making it difficult to discern their true features. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed something peculiar about their hands. Their fingers seemed to elongate and retract with each step, like grotesque talons. It was a sight so unsettling that I couldn't tear my gaze away, even as fear gripped me tighter. The closer they came, the more distorted their forms appeared. Their bodies seemed to ripple and shift, as though they were composed of ever-moving shadows. My mind struggled to process the surreal nightmare unfolding before my eyes. As they drew nearer, I could hear their whispers, a cacophony of malevolent voices that seemed to seep into my very soul. They spoke in a language I couldn't comprehend, their words a maddening symphony of incomprehensible sounds. Fear coursed through my veins, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in this nightmarish tableau with no means of escape. The figures surrounded the rest stop, their presence suffocating, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. "Stay," they hissed, their voices echoing through my mind. I felt their influence creeping over me, a suffocating weight that threatened to consume my very essence. It was as if I were being drawn into the darkness, becoming one with the malevolent force that held sway over this accursed place. But a flicker of determination stirred within me, a spark of defiance against the encroaching terror. With every ounce of my willpower, I tore my gaze away from the figures outside and made a mad dash for the door. The bell above the exit jingled as I burst out into the night, the cold air hitting me like a shock to the system. I stumbled to my car, fumbling for my keys, and with a screech of tires, I peeled out of the rest stop's parking lot, leaving the figures and their whispered commands behind. As I sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent lingered within me, a lingering darkness that clung to my soul. The nightmarish rest stop had left its mark, a chilling reminder that some horrors were not meant to be confronted, but rather, escaped from. I drove on through the night, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that accursed place. The clock on my dashboard ticked forward in the usual manner, and the figures in the rearview mirror remained nothing more than a distant memory, a nightmare I hoped never to revisit. But as the first rays of dawn broke on the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder if the nightmarish rest stop still lurked in the shadows, waiting to ensnare another weary traveler in its sinister grip. Now, before we come back with brand new episodes for you, do subscribe to our channel Horror Talker. And share it with your friends and family. Until next time, stay awake and stay alert, because you never know. The night had fallen like a heavy curtain over the industrial wasteland of Decker's Crossing, and I found myself navigating the labyrinth of narrow streets and forgotten factories. I was a trucker, no stranger to late-night deliveries in the most desolate corners of the country. But this job was different. It was marked by a clandestine air that sent shivers down my spine. The message had come through my dispatcher earlier that evening, a voice on the other end instructing me to make a delivery to an abandoned warehouse at Decker's Crossing Industrial Park. There were no specifics about the cargo, just a firm directive to get there by midnight. The urgency in the dispatcher's voice had been palpable, and I knew better than to ask questions. In this line of work, you learn not to dig too deep. As I drove deeper into the industrial park, the streets became more labyrinthine, the shadows more foreboding. The warehouse I was looking for was supposed to be at the far end, far away from any prying eyes. It was a place where secrets were born and buried. Finally, I spotted it, a massive, dilapidated structure looming in the darkness like a giant tombstone. Its windows were shattered, and its walls were tagged with graffiti that hinted at a turbulent past. This was the place, and the pit in my stomach grew deeper as I pulled my rig to a stop in front of the warehouse's rusted doors. The air was thick with an eerie stillness as I stepped out of my truck. I felt exposed, vulnerable in the silence that enveloped me. The only sound was the distant hum of machinery, like the ghostly remnants of industry long gone. The only sign of life was the distant hum of machinery, a melancholic reminder of a time when this place had pulsed with vitality. But there was something unsettling about that distant hum. It felt like the ghostly remnants of a bygone era, a spectral chorus of machines that should have long since fallen silent. It was a dissonant, haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine, like a lament from a world that had slipped into the abyss. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes followed my every move. The eerie stillness seemed to close in around me, like a vice squeezing my chest. Every step I took echoed in the silence, each footfall a reminder that I was alone in this forsaken place. As I approached the warehouse, I noticed faint flickers of light emanating from within. My heart raced as I pushed open the creaking doors and stepped into the darkness. The air grew heavy with the weight of secrets, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I had unwittingly crossed a threshold into a world of darkness and danger. What I saw inside sent a chill down my spine. The cavernous space was filled with a group of shadowy figures, their silhouettes moving with purpose. They wore hooded cloaks that billowed around them like specters, their faces obscured by the deep hoods. In the center of the warehouse, an array of strange objects was arranged in a mystic pattern that defied explanation. It was a grotesque collage of the bizarre and the macabre, a tableau that seemed ripped from the pages of a deranged occult ritual. I stood there, my eyes wide with disbelief, as I tried to make sense of the nightmarish scene that unfolded before me. Candles cast an eerie glow on the scene, their flames dancing like ancient spirits, their flickering light casting grotesque, shifting shadows on the rusted walls. The air was heavy with the acrid scent of melting wax, mingling with the unmistakable stench of something far more sinister. And in the midst of it all, a low, haunting chant filled the air, a language I couldn't understand but that sent shivers down my spine. It was a guttural, otherworldly incantation, a cacophony of voices that seemed to emanate from the very depths of hell itself. The chant was like a serpent's hiss, a sinister serenade that crawled under my skin and coiled around my heart. The objects in the mystic pattern were a grotesque menagerie, a mishmash of bones, feathers, and symbols that defied any logical meaning. They were arranged with a deliberate precision that spoke of a malevolent purpose, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something far darker than I could have ever imagined. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of there as fast as I could. But my legs felt like lead, and I was frozen in place as I watched the surreal spectacle unfold. Then, as if sensing my presence, one of the hooded figures turned toward me. Their movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. Their hood concealed their features, but their eyes, dark and intense, met mine for a fleeting moment before they returned to their ritual. The figure's eyes seemed to bore into me, as though they could see the fear that gripped my heart and the questions that churned in my mind. It was a gaze that sent a shiver down my spine, a silent warning that I had trespassed into a realm where I did not belong. With every ounce of willpower, I backed away, my heart racing, and made my way back to the truck, not daring to look back. As I pulled out of the industrial park, I couldn't shake the feeling that those figures were watching me, their eyes burning into my soul. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I pulled into a nearby 24-hour diner, hoping to find a quiet corner where I could gather my thoughts. The place was nearly empty, save for a few late-night patrons nursing their coffee. I sat down at a booth by the window and pulled out my phone, dialing my dispatcher's number. I had to know what I had stumbled into, why I had been sent to that warehouse in the dead of night. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the line, and I wasted no time in recounting what I had witnessed. There was a long pause on the other end, and when the voice finally spoke, it was trembling with fear. "You need to get out of there, now," the dispatcher said. "You've stumbled into something you shouldn't have, something dangerous. I can't explain it all over the phone, but you have to trust me." My heart sank as I realized the gravity of the situation. I had unwittingly become entangled in something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. "What do I do?" I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Head west on Route 12, the dispatcher instructed. "I'll text you an address. Meet me there. We need to figure out our next move, but you have to stay off the grid. Trust no one." I hung up the phone and felt a growing sense of dread wash over me. I knew that I had to deliver the cargo to its destination, to rid myself of this nightmarish burden. But the road stretched on, endless and unforgiving, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was now a part of a deadly conspiracy, a conspiracy with consequences I couldn't even begin to fathom. As I drove into the unknown, my mind raced with questions, but the answers remained elusive, hidden in the shadowy recesses of Decker's Crossing Industrial Park, waiting to be uncovered by a trucker who had stumbled into a world of secrets and danger. I remember that night like it was yesterday, though it's been years since that bone-chilling encounter on the lonely highway. I was a trucker hauling a load of goods across the desolate heartland of the United States. The moon hung high in the clear night sky, casting an eerie pallor over the winding, seemingly endless road ahead. As the miles passed, the low fuel warning light on my dashboard began to glow ominously. Panic gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, and I knew I needed to find a gas station soon. With the nearest town still miles away, I couldn't afford to run out of fuel in the middle of nowhere. Then, like a lifeline in the darkness, a flickering neon sign appeared on the horizon, announcing the presence of a fuel stop. Relieved, I steered my rig off the highway and onto the cracked, uneven pavement of the access road leading to the station. The place looked old, maybe even abandoned, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Pulling up to the rusty fuel pumps, I killed the engine and climbed down from the cab. The night air was frigid, carrying with it a sense of desolation that matched the surroundings. I shivered involuntarily, a feeling of unease washing over me. The fuel stop appeared long past its glory days. The faded paint on the pumps and the peeling decals hinted at a time when it had been a bustling hub for travelers. Now, it stood as a forgotten relic of a bygone era. But something about the place sent a chill down my spine, a sense that I was not alone. As I began refueling, I glanced around, my eyes drawn to the walls of the small store adjacent to the pumps. Strange symbols were etched into the decaying wood, and they seemed to pulse with an eerie energy in the dim light. I couldn't make sense of them, but they triggered a growing sense of dread within me. With the tank full, I hastily replaced the fuel nozzle and stepped inside the store, hoping to find answers or at least someone to explain the bizarre symbols. The interior was just as unsettling as the exterior. Shelves lined with dusty, long-expired goods loomed over me, and a layer of cobwebs covered nearly everything. A bell above the door jingled as I entered, but there was no sign of life. The eerie silence pressed in on me, and I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. I felt like an intruder in a long-abandoned place, but my desperation to understand the situation kept me moving forward. That's when I heard it, the faintest of sounds coming from the woods beyond the fuel stop. It was a strange, ethereal melody, like the eerie song of a distant flute. The notes seemed to beckon me, and my curiosity got the better of my fear. I stepped cautiously toward the source of the music, pushing through the overgrown weeds and branches that separated the fuel stop from the woods. As I ventured deeper into the trees, the music grew louder and more unsettling. It was as though the forest itself was alive with some hidden presence, something that defied reason and comprehension. Then, just beyond a gnarled oak tree, I saw them, figures moving in the shadows, their forms barely discernible in the dim moonlight. Panic surged through me as I realized I was not alone in the woods. I turned to flee, to retreat to the safety of my truck, but a force beyond my control compelled me to stay. It was as though an invisible hand held me in place, forcing me to watch as the figures drew closer. Their faces remained obscured, shrouded in darkness, but their movements were deliberate and purposeful. They circled around me, their eerie music filling the air. I felt like prey being toyed with by predators, and a primal terror gripped me. Suddenly, one of them stepped forward, their face partially illuminated by the moonlight. It was a mask, a grotesque, twisted visage that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't see their eyes, but I could feel them boring into my soul. In that moment, I knew I had to escape, to get back to my truck and drive far, far away from this place. With every ounce of willpower, I tore my gaze from the figure and sprinted back through the woods, ignoring the music that seemed to chase after me. I burst into the clearing of the fuel stop, gasping for breath, and made a mad dash for my truck. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the accelerator, tires screeching as I peeled out of that nightmarish place. As I sped away, the eerie music faded into the distance, and I couldn't help but glance back in the rearview mirror. The abandoned fuel stop and its grotesque symbols disappeared from view, but the memory of that encounter would haunt my dreams for years to come. To this day, I have no explanation for what I witnessed that night. All I know is that there are places in this vast country where the boundaries of reality blur, where the darkness hides secrets that should remain undiscovered. And I count myself lucky to have escaped with my life, haunted by the knowledge that some mysteries are better left unsolved. My knuckles gripped the steering wheel, my rig's powerful engine growling beneath me as I navigated the labyrinth of taillights that stretched out ahead. It was a typical night for a long-haul trucker like me, but this traffic jam was anything but ordinary. I had been crawling along the highway for hours, and my patience was running thinner by the minute. I knew I couldn't afford to waste any more time, not with the tight delivery schedule I was on. I glanced at the illuminated numbers on my dashboard clock, cursing under my breath. It was past midnight, and I had miles to go before I could rest. That's when I spotted it, like a beacon of hope in the darkness, an exit sign indicating a detour onto a remote, abandoned highway. The sign beckoned with the promise of open road and a chance to escape the seemingly endless line of vehicles. Without a second thought, I signaled and veered off the highway, my rig's tires crunching on the gravelly road. The night air was crisp and cool, a refreshing change from the stuffy cab of my truck. As I continued down the desolate road, the city's glow faded into the distance, and I was enveloped by an eerie darkness. The only light came from my truck's headlights, casting long shadows on the empty highway ahead. The silence was palpable, broken only by the low hum of my engine. But soon, the solitude of the open road gave way to unsettling occurrences that left me questioning my decision to take this detour. The first sign of trouble was a series of roadblocks, seemingly placed at random intervals. They were crude, constructed from old barrels, wooden planks, and pieces of rusted metal. I slowed down to navigate around them, growing increasingly uneasy. Who would go to such lengths to block this forgotten road? And why? My unease deepened when my phone rang, the sudden jolt of its ringtone startling me in the quiet night. I glanced at the caller ID, it was an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, I finally answered. "Hello?" I muttered, my voice trembling ever so slightly. Static crackled on the other end before a distorted voice spoke, barely comprehensible. "Turn back, danger, go back." I frowned, struggling to make out the words. "Who is this? What are you talking about?" But before I could get any answers, the call abruptly ended, leaving me with nothing but unanswered questions and a growing sense of dread. As I pressed on, the unsettling roadblocks continued to appear, each one more menacing than the last. Some bore warning signs, words like "go back" and "danger ahead" spray-painted in bold, dripping letters. The crude messages seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, as though they were dire premonitions etched by a malevolent force. The roadblocks themselves grew increasingly bizarre and unnerving. Massive boulders, stacked like towering sentinels, blocked the path. Abandoned vehicles, rusted and mangled, lay strewn across the highway, as if they had been hurled there by an unseen hand. My truck rumbled and groaned as I navigated these obstacles, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. A cold sweat beaded on my forehead, and my heart pounded like a relentless drum. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to turn back, to flee this nightmarish gauntlet that seemed determined to keep me from my destination. I couldn't explain it, but I felt an unshakable need to deliver the cargo, to complete this harrowing journey no matter the cost. The weight of responsibility hung heavy on my shoulders, even as the roadblocks taunted and threatened me. I had no choice but to keep going. Turning back now would mean rejoining the nightmare traffic jam I had been desperate to escape. Then came the shadowy figures. At first, I spotted them out of the corner of my eye, fleeting glimpses of indistinct forms lurking at the edge of my vision. They seemed to emerge from the darkness, their movements erratic and unnatural. I tried to dismiss them as tricks of the mind, mere products of my exhaustion and the eerie surroundings. But as they drew nearer, I could no longer deny their presence. Figures in tattered clothing and hunched postures, their faces hidden beneath hooded jackets and hats, stepped onto the road in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, my truck shuddering to a stop just in time to avoid a collision. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield at the shadowy figures. They were close now, mere feet from my rig. Their eyes, or what little I could see of them, glowed with an unnatural, malevolent light. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was trapped, surrounded by these strangers on this desolate highway. Then, as if coordinated by some unseen force, they began to chant in unison, a chant that sent shivers down my spine. The words were incomprehensible, a guttural language that seemed otherworldly. I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help, but it had no signal. I was completely cut off from the outside world. The silence inside the cab of my truck was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the engine. I frantically tried to regain a signal, my fingers trembling as I tapped the screen, but the phone remained stubbornly unresponsive. It was as if the very air around me had thickened, choking off any connection to the world beyond. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, 1,000 fears. What had I stumbled into? Who were those shadowy figures in the warehouse, and what was the cargo I was transporting? And most urgently, how could I escape this twisted stretch of highway that seemed determined to keep me captive? The darkness outside my truck seemed to grow denser, more impenetrable. As their eerie chant continued, I knew I had to act. With trembling hands, I shifted my truck into reverse and began to back away from the encroaching figures. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I made a hasty retreat. But they didn't pursue me. Instead, they watched, their malevolent gaze never leaving me as I retreated down the abandoned highway. I drove for hours, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. The roadblocks, the mysterious phone call, and the shadowy figures haunted my thoughts, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I had stumbled into something beyond my understanding. Eventually, I rejoined the main highway, my rig roaring back to life as I merged with the traffic. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a warm, reassuring light over the road. As I continued my journey, I couldn't help but wonder about the enigma of that remote, abandoned highway. What had I stumbled upon, and who were those shadowy figures? I may never know the answers, but one thing was certain, I would never forget that nightmarish detour, a chilling reminder that sometimes, the road less traveled leads to the darkest of places. Now, before we come back with brand new episodes for you, do subscribe to our channel Horror Talker. And share it with your friends and family. Until next time, stay awake and stay alert, because, you'd never know. Have you ever been somewhere and deep down, in your heart, you just knew that something is gravely wrong? Because, I have. And it did not go well. The sun dipped low on the horizon as we cruised down the winding Mississippi backroads, the sweltering heat giving way to the cooler embrace of dusk. My friends and I were in the midst of a road trip, seeking adventure off the beaten path. It was on one of these remote roads, where the dense forest seemed to swallow us whole, that we stumbled upon it, the decaying playground hidden behind an abandoned orphanage. The sight was eerie, even in the fading light. Rusted swings creaked in the gentle breeze, their chains tangled and twisted like the memories of children who had long since vanished. A cracked slide spiraled down from a rotting wooden platform, and the paint on a merry-go-round had faded to a ghostly pale gray. It was a playground frozen in time, and it sent shivers down our spines. "Hey, you guys want to check it out?" Mark, always the adventurous one, suggested with a mischievous grin. His girlfriend, Sarah, raised an eyebrow but couldn't hide her intrigue. Jake, the skeptic of the group, chimed in, "What's the worst that can happen? It's just an old playground." Reluctantly, I agreed, my curiosity getting the better of me. We parked the car by the side of the road and made our way toward the forsaken playground. With each step, the creaking of the swings and the eerie stillness of the surrounding forest seemed to grow more pronounced. As we explored the decaying play equipment, it became clear that this place held a sinister history. Faded murals on the walls of the orphanage depicted scenes of children playing happily, but the reality was far from idyllic. We had heard rumors about this place, stories of orphans who had vanished without a trace, tales of abuse and neglect. Mark discovered a stack of old newspapers in the corner of one of the rooms. As we began to sift through them, the headlines told a haunting story. The orphanage had been plagued by a series of unexplained accidents and disappearances. Children had reported seeing strange figures lurking in the shadows, and some claimed that the playground itself was cursed. A chill ran down my spine as I read about the tragic fate of a young girl named Emily, who had been one of the orphans here. She had disappeared one fateful night, and her body was never found. As I read through the faded ink of her journal entries, it was as if I could hear her voice, her innocent musings about the world and her hopes and dreams. Emily's words painted a picture of a spirited young girl, full of life and curiosity, confined to the oppressive walls of the Vanderbilt estate. Her last journal entry was dated the night of her disappearance. She wrote of hearing strange noises in the darkness, whispers that seemed to beckon her from the shadows. Her words were filled with fear and confusion, a desperate plea for someone to save her from the encroaching darkness. A sense of dread washed over me as I continued reading, realizing that Emily's fate had been sealed that very night. The mansion had claimed her as one of its own, its dark history swallowing her whole. The investigation into Emily's disappearance had been nothing short of a nightmare. The local authorities had scoured the surrounding area, searching every nook and cranny of the estate, but there had been no sign of the young girl. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. The journal entries hinted at something more sinister, though. Emily's fear of the strange noises and whispers that plagued her nights pointed to a malevolent presence within the mansion's walls. The orphans had spoken of eerie apparitions and strange happenings, but their tales had been dismissed as the ramblings of traumatized children. The truth was far more horrifying. Emily had not been the only child to disappear within those haunted halls. As we delved deeper into our investigation, we discovered records of other orphans who had met similar fates, children who had gone to bed one night and never woken up. As I closed Emily's journal, I couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness and dread. The mansion's dark history had claimed the lives of innocent children, leaving behind only whispers of their suffering. We had stumbled upon a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, one that defied explanation. Evelyn and I knew that we had to uncover the truth, to shed light on the horrors that had transpired within the Vanderbilt estate. But as the days turned into weeks, and the mansion's malevolence continued to haunt our every step, we couldn't help but wonder if we had bitten off more than we could chew. The investigation had yielded no leads, and her disappearance remained a mystery. Sarah's voice trembled as she read aloud another article about the sudden deaths of several orphanage staff members. They had all perished under mysterious circumstances, and the authorities had been unable to determine the cause. It was as if the very walls of the orphanage held dark secrets that refused to be revealed. We decided to explore further, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness that had settled over the playground. The air grew colder, and a feeling of unease settled upon us. It was as though the past was reaching out to us, whispering its secrets in hushed tones. As we ventured deeper into the orphanage, strange phenomena began to occur. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the faint echoes of children's laughter filled the air. Sarah swore she saw a figure standing at the end of a dimly lit hallway, but when we approached, there was nothing there. Tensions ran high as we continued our investigation. Mark, who had been the most eager to explore, was now visibly on edge. Jake's skepticism had given way to nervous glances, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched by unseen eyes. It was then that we heard it, the soft, haunting melody of a music box. The sound seemed to come from all around us, its source impossible to pinpoint. We followed the eerie tune to a small, dilapidated room at the end of a corridor. Inside, we found an old music box, its lid adorned with faded images of children playing. The tune it played was achingly sweet, a stark contrast to the foreboding atmosphere of the orphanage. Sarah reached out to touch it, and as her fingers brushed the cold metal, the music abruptly stopped. A sense of dread washed over us, and we knew we had overstayed our welcome in this place. With a newfound urgency, we made our way back to the car, the oppressive darkness of the forest seeming to press in on us from all sides. As we drove away from the abandoned orphanage, our minds raced with questions and unease. What had we stumbled upon? What secrets did that forsaken place hold, and had we unwittingly become a part of its sinister history? One thing was certain, the decaying playground and the orphanage it hid behind were not as they seemed. The shadows of the past lingered there, and the chilling history of the orphans who had once played on those rusted swings was one that would haunt us for years to come. The sun bore down relentlessly as we approached the desolate research complex in the heart of Arizona. The compound had been abandoned for decades, its laboratories filled with mysterious equipment left to gather dust. We were a team of scientists, driven by a thirst for knowledge and a shared sense of curiosity that had brought us together. Little did we know that our pursuit of understanding would lead us down a dark and terrifying path. The complex had once been the site of groundbreaking research, but the nature of those experiments remained shrouded in secrecy. The government had sealed off the facility, and rumors of unethical studies and disturbing phenomena had swirled in its wake. It was that air of mystery that drew us to the place, despite the warnings of locals who knew better than to meddle with the past. Our team consisted of Dr. Emily Turner, a brilliant physicist with a penchant for the unexplained, Dr. Robert Hernandez, a seasoned biologist with a passion for unraveling the mysteries of life, and myself, Dr. Daniel Harris, a chemist with an insatiable curiosity for the unknown. We were united by a shared desire to push the boundaries of human knowledge. The moment we set foot inside the complex, an eerie silence descended upon us. Dust-covered corridors stretched out in all directions, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. The laboratories we explored were filled with perplexing equipment, most of it covered in tarps, as if the scientists had hurriedly abandoned their work. Our first breakthrough came when we uncovered a series of journals hidden in a forgotten storage room. They detailed the experiments conducted in the complex, and as we pored over them, a sense of unease settled upon us. The entries were cryptic, filled with references to the anomaly and the source. It wasn't long before we discovered the lab that held the key to our curiosity, Lab 7A. Unlike the others, it had remained locked, its entrance secured with a heavy steel door. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, we set about breaking in, determined to unearth the secrets hidden within. The moment we stepped inside, we knew we had stumbled upon something beyond our comprehension. The laboratory was filled with arcane machinery, its purpose indecipherable. As we examined the equipment, we realized that whatever had been studied here was far from ordinary. Hours turned into days as we delved deeper into the research. We began to understand the complex interplay of energies and forces that the scientists had sought to harness. It was as if they had unlocked the very fabric of reality itself. Our excitement grew, but so did our unease. One night, as we worked late into the early hours, an unsettling event shook us to our core. The machinery in Lab 7A began to hum with an otherworldly energy. Lights flickered, and the air grew charged with an eerie electricity. It was as though the experiments had come back to life, and we were at their mercy. We scrambled to shut down the equipment, our hearts racing with fear and fascination. It was then that we realized the horrifying truth: the experiments conducted here had opened a rift to another realm, and the anomaly referenced in the journals was something beyond our understanding. The dimly lit laboratory was filled with the hum of electrical equipment, the blinking lights of monitors, and the faint scent of chemicals. It was an environment we had grown accustomed to over months of research, but on that fateful night, it became something far more ominous. As my colleague, Dr. Mitchell, and I worked diligently to decipher the enigmatic experiments that had taken place within the laboratory's walls, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The data we had uncovered hinted at research that delved into the very fabric of the universe, probing the mysteries of existence itself. It was a realm of science that held boundless potential but also unfathomable risks. The first sign of trouble came as we attempted to access the core of the research. The computer system, which had been running smoothly for weeks, began to glitch and sputter. It was as though some unseen force was resisting our intrusion, pushing back against our relentless pursuit of knowledge. We tried to regain control of the situation, but it was as if the laboratory had a will of its own. The equipment malfunctioned, spewing sparks and hissing with a malevolent fury. The monitors displayed incomprehensible data, and the lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Fear gnawed at the edges of our rationality, but we couldn't tear ourselves away. The research was too important, too tantalizing to abandon. We had ventured into uncharted territory, probing the mysteries of the cosmos, and we couldn't turn back now. As we struggled to regain control, a sense of dread settled over us. It was a realization that we had delved too deep, crossed boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. The laboratory, once a haven of scientific inquiry, had become a battleground between human curiosity and an unnatural force that defied explanation. In our desperation, we managed to deactivate the machinery, and the lab fell silent once more. But the damage had been done. We had glimpsed the abyss, and it had stared back at us with malevolent intent. Over the following days, we attempted to seal the rift and contain the anomaly, but it proved to be an insurmountable task. The complex itself seemed to resist our efforts, as though it had become sentient and sought to protect the dark secrets hidden within. Tensions within our team grew as fear and paranoia took hold. We had become prisoners of our own curiosity, trapped in a complex that defied the laws of science and reason. The journals we had uncovered hinted at the dire consequences of meddling with forces beyond our control, and we realized that we were now living those consequences. In the end, we made the only choice we could, to leave the complex and seal it off once more, hoping that the anomaly would remain contained within its walls. As we retreated from that place of unspeakable horror, we couldn't help but wonder if we had glimpsed the very edge of reality itself, and if the darkness we had awakened would forever haunt our dreams. The complex in Arizona stood as a silent testament to the dangers of unchecked curiosity, a place where the boundaries between science and the supernatural blurred, and where the pursuit of knowledge had led us down a path from which there could be no return. The southern sun hung low in the Louisiana sky as Dr. Evelyn Davis and I stood before the decaying mansion. With its ivy-covered walls and ominous air, the place seemed to exhale history itself. I, Dr. Samuel Mitchell, had come as a historian, and Evelyn as an archaeologist. Our shared curiosity had drawn us together, but little did we know what dark secrets lay hidden within those decaying walls. The mansion, known locally as the Vanderbilt Estate, had long stood abandoned, its history buried beneath layers of dust and vines. It was said that the original owner, Alexander Vanderbilt, had disappeared mysteriously, leaving behind a legacy of enigma. Legends of strange happenings and eerie apparitions had swirled around the estate, but we were here to uncover the truth. With a mixture of trepidation and excitement, we ventured inside, armed with flashlights and our knowledge of the past. The air inside was heavy with the scent of rot and decay, and our footsteps echoed through the grand but crumbling hallways. Dust-covered portraits stared down at us with faded eyes, as though judging our intrusion. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a hidden chamber, concealed behind a bookshelf in the mansion's library. The chamber was small, barely large enough to accommodate two people, and its walls were lined with cryptic artifacts, strange symbols etched onto stones, archaic manuscripts, and unsettling figurines. Evelyn's eyes gleamed with curiosity as she examined the artifacts. "These are unlike anything I've ever seen," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the heavy silence of the chamber. "These symbols, they don't belong to any known civilization." I nodded, my heart pounding with excitement. This could rewrite history, Evelyn. We may have stumbled upon something truly remarkable. Over the weeks that followed, we dedicated ourselves to deciphering the artifacts' meanings. Late into the night, we pored over ancient texts and consulted experts from around the world. But the more we learned, the darker the mansion's history became. Alexander Vanderbilt, it seemed, had been obsessed with the occult. The symbols on the artifacts pointed to rituals and ceremonies that defied reason. There were references to a gateway and an other side, as well as cryptic mentions of the Keeper of Secrets. As we pieced together the puzzle, an unsettling feeling settled upon us. The mansion itself seemed to react to our investigations. Shadows danced in the corners of our vision, and we heard whispers in the dead of night, though we were the sole living souls present. The chamber was a small, dimly lit space within the decaying mansion, its walls lined with shelves bearing an array of cryptic artifacts. As we ventured further into the room, our initial sense of excitement gave way to an unsettling feeling of unease. One evening, as we delved into the artifacts once more, a shiver ran down my spine, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. It was a sensation I couldn't quite shake, that eerie feeling of being watched. I brushed it off as mere paranoia, a byproduct of the eerie surroundings, and turned my attention back to the artifacts. Evelyn, my partner in this endeavor, had also grown increasingly uneasy in recent days. Her usually composed demeanor was marred by a nervous tension that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. We had both been captivated by the mystery of the mansion and its hidden chamber, but now, our fascination was tinged with a growing sense of dread. As we meticulously examined each artifact, our fingers trembling slightly, the room seemed to close in around us. The low hum of the mansion's decaying structure outside was accompanied by the occasional creak and groan, as though the very walls of the chamber were whispering secrets of their own. I couldn't help but glance at Evelyn again, and this time, I saw fear in her eyes, a reflection of the fear that had taken hold of my own heart. It was as though an unseen presence lingered in the room with us, its eyes trained upon our every move. As we continued our exploration, the atmosphere in the chamber grew increasingly oppressive. The air seemed to thicken with an otherworldly presence, and the dim light cast long, ominous shadows that danced along the walls. It was as though the room itself had become a living entity, one that resented our intrusion into its secrets. I dared not voice my concerns to Evelyn, for fear of confirming the dread that had taken root within us both. Instead, we pressed on, our determination warring with our growing sense of foreboding. But that evening, as I reached for an ancient tome, my hand hesitated in midair. I had heard it, a soft, whispered breath that sent chills down my spine. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I saw nothing but the dimly lit chamber. Then, in the faint glow of a flickering candle, I saw it, a fleeting shadow, a silhouette that shouldn't have been there. Panic surged through me, and I stammered Evelyn's name. She turned toward me, her face pale, and I could see that she had heard it too, the whispered breath, the ghostly presence that lingered in the room with us. "These artifacts, they're a key," she murmured, her fingers trembling as she traced the symbols. "A key to something beyond our understanding." I agreed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that we were delving into a darkness that should have remained hidden. But our curiosity drove us on, and we began to uncover the mansion's sinister past. It was said that Alexander Vanderbilt had used the artifacts in experiments to open a gateway to another realm, to seek knowledge from beings beyond our world. The experiments had led to madness, disappearances, and ultimately, to the mansion's abandonment. As we read more, we realized that the gateway had never been closed. The mansion itself was a vessel, and the Keeper of Secrets was still bound to it. We were now part of a dark and malevolent history, and the mansion sought to claim us as its own. Our sleepless nights were filled with nightmares, visions of shadowy figures and cryptic symbols. We knew that the only way to free ourselves from the mansion's grasp was to seal the gateway, but doing so would require a sacrifice. As we prepared for the ritual, we couldn't help but wonder if we were making a grave mistake. The mansion's malevolence had grown stronger, and we feared that it would not release us willingly. In the dimly lit chamber, we stood at the center of a circle we had painstakingly drawn on the floor, our voices trembling as we recited incantations passed down through ancient texts. The symbols we had carefully etched into the ground glowed faintly, casting eerie patterns of light and shadow across the room's decaying walls. We had embarked on a journey into the unknown, and the air grew heavy with the anticipation of what we were about to unleash. As we chanted, the very atmosphere in the chamber seemed to shift, as though the room itself were alive with an otherworldly energy. It was a palpable presence, a force that transcended our understanding of the natural world. The temperature dropped, and our breaths formed frosty plumes in the chilled air, despite the sweltering heat outside. The artifacts we had collected, each imbued with its own mystique, pulsed in response to our incantations. The ancient tomes, their pages filled with cryptic text, seemed to resonate with hidden knowledge. Relics of a bygone era, adorned with intricate symbols and patterns, took on a life of their own, as though they yearned to share their secrets. As our voices rose and fell in the arcane cadence of the incantations, the room itself seemed to react. Shadows danced on the cracked and weathered walls, their movements taking on a sinister life of their own. The very floor beneath our feet seemed to shift and ripple, as though the chamber were a living entity, responding to our invocation. Fear and anticipation gnawed at the edges of our consciousness, but we pressed on, driven by an insatiable curiosity to unlock the mysteries that had been concealed within the hidden chamber for centuries. The room grew darker, and the flickering candlelight cast eerie, elongated shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of our vision. As we neared the culmination of the incantations, a sense of foreboding settled upon us like a heavy shroud. We could feel the ancient powers we had invoked drawing nearer, their presence looming on the precipice of our reality. It was in that moment, as the air grew thick with an oppressive tension, that we realized the gravity of our actions. We had delved too deeply into the unknown, ventured too far into the forbidden territory of arcane knowledge. The chamber itself had become a vessel for the ancient and malevolent forces we had unwittingly awakened. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing our candles and plunging us into darkness. We heard whispers, the voice of the Keeper of Secrets, urging us to join it on the other side. Fear and dread coursed through our veins as we realized the horrifying truth. With trembling hands, we completed the ritual just in time, sealing the gateway and banishing the malevolent presence from the mansion. But the cost had been high, and we knew that we could never return. As we left the Vanderbilt estate behind, we couldn't help but feel that we had narrowly escaped the clutches of darkness. The artifacts remained locked within the hidden chamber, their secrets now hidden once more. Evelyn and I went our separate ways, forever marked by our encounter with the mansion's chilling history. We had uncovered the truth, but at what price? The Vanderbilt estate stood as a testament to the dangers of curiosity, a place where the line between the known and the unknown blurred, and where the pursuit of knowledge had led us to the brink of madness. Now, before we come back with brand new episodes for you, do subscribe to our channel Horror Talker. And share it with your friends and family. Until next time, stay awake and stay alert, because you never know.